Sebastian, how are you today?
Very good. Thank you very much, Chris.
And obviously, I for Kompas, I know there's several locations the business is in: Tel Aviv, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, and one
Berlin.
other,
Berlin.
Berlin.
Berlin. And I imagine you may be in one of them, or maybe not.
I'm not. No, I'm in Munich. I just
On your
come
way
back
to
from
one of
a.
them.
Indeed. I'm on the way back to Amsterdam. I spent some time in Munich and Zurich this week, attending NOAA and then attending one of our board meetings, one of our
Okay.
portfolio companies' board meetings, which was a really good experience. So yeah, I do spend quite a lot of time on the road. We have a model where we cover different areas, and maybe I can take a step back and talk
Yeah.
a little
Well,
bit about Compass. I have a vested interest in ensuring that Britain is doing well. I have two passports now. I lived
okay.
more than 20 years in the UK. I came in '96 when Britain and London in particular was just this incredible melting
Mm.
pot, and cool Britannia, New Labour. There was a lot going on there.
Mm.
I was of course a little bit sad to see the turn that things have taken, but it
Yeah.
is still a very, very vibrant ecosystem. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I do spend quite a lot of time still in London, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah, well, obviously work brought you to London and previous role in another VC, or was that in a
Yeah.
different
So
time?
no, I actually the first job I had was at MTV. Uh,
Oh,
I was
really?
an
Hmm.
intern at MTV at Oxford Street, and then spent some time at Holy Crescent as well, which was pretty wild pre-university. And then
Yeah.
I went up and studied at Cambridge, read my
So you
first
went
degree
from
there.
MTV, which hasten to add for some of the viewers and listeners, I'd probably say that was that in the mid 90s or late 90s?
1996,
Yeah.
1996, yeah.
So then, if you think of like how hot TikTok is, or how, especially at the moment, for consuming musical content or advertising, MTV was that on TV,
Yes,
I would say. It was
Sort of the
super cool.
kingmakers of music, weren't they, for a little bit?
Yeah. It's still
absolutely.
going,
Yeah.
isn't it? But I mean, it's quite a funny jump though, Sebastian, going MTV to Cambridge. I mean, kind of somewhat of a switcheroo.
Well, I always, I mean, I wanted to become a journalist, and I was always super keen of working in the media industry. I'd actually interned at an advertising agency just after school, and then managed to secure this internship at MTV. And I went to the UK to study history, to then eventually, enter a media organization. It all didn't quite work out like that, although I
Mm.
did,
It
spend
does.
quite a lot of time in the media
Mm.
industry in various roles. But yeah, I think the motivation was really to do a degree that would sort of pave the way into journalism.
Mm.
But of course, journalism itself has gone through quite a big transformation over the last 20 odd years or so. So
Yeah.
yeah, very, very interesting.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks for that. So, look, just reference point. We always do this for listeners. We are currently on the 9th of December. I should remember that because it's my wedding anniversary today. And I haven't seen my wife. She's been
Congratulations.
at Christmas. Oh, thank you. It's 16 years.
Wow.
Silver, apparently. So, an expensive one. And I haven't actually seen my wife this morning because she was at a big swanky do in the Cotswolds. I got a happy anniversary from my 11-year-old daughter, which was nice. My
Hmm.
sons just couldn't even be bothered to say anything, but sons, Celebi. Anyhow, look, less of my bleating. So for people who are unfamiliar with Compass, it's good to sort of get a quick download. Obviously, great website, seeing that lays it out very succinctly. But I suppose you being at NOAA,
Mhm.
is there a particular trend that you're focused on at the moment? I know you focus on three key areas. Any
Mhm.
one of those three particularly in vogue at the moment, or in general, you're looking towards 2023 with an open mind and managing the portfolio and also looking to do some investments. So I suppose, yeah, if you could just give us a sort of general overview of where you are at the moment.
Sure. Let's probably take a step back and quickly summarize for your listeners, who we are and what we do. So we are an early stage venture capital firm, and as you said, with offices in Amsterdam, Berlin, Copenhagen, and Tel Aviv. We are very focused on funding sort of innovation that accelerates digital transformation and the decarbonization of the building and manufacturing industry. So we are really a specialist fund with a sector focus. And across those two industries, really look at anything that enhances the sustainability of those industries or really accelerates the digital transformation. We tend to invest in seed and Series A between 1 and 5 million euros as a first ticket. The first fund has 135 million euros in capital. There are three partners: Talia, who's based in Tel Aviv, and Andreas, who's based in Berlin. And I'm the managing partner, managing the Amsterdam office as well, taking over responsibility for the fund. We really kind of try and do our small bit to reduce emissions, which are a significant challenge within the building and construction industry. If you want to transition towards a net zero carbon economy, you can't really get around the building industry in particular. 40% of our CO2 emissions are in one way or another globally associated with that sector. So driving down emissions, reducing waste, promoting circularity, these are really, really important topics if we really want to get somewhere with our net zero targets. And so this is a really, really rich and rewarding field in many ways. It's a massive challenge, but massive challenges also bring them great investment opportunities. And we see such a flurry of activity in this space. You were asking me about some of the trends we're spotting in the moment. There's a lot of focus we have on industrial automation, on supply chain management, and in the built environment in particular, you're looking at advanced materials, at ways to basically really replace traditional materials like cement and concrete, for example, with more sustainable materials. There are some amazing companies out there who are doing really sophisticated work to improve those materials and just ensure that the industry is developing a better track record and isn't quite the sort of polluter that it is today.
Okay, so that's all very positive, Sebastian. Thank you. I suppose I'm kind of going to drill into a bit of the areas of grey here, largely because I've kind of in the last 4 to 6 months started to pick up on a bit of a trend where sustainability, climate tech, buildings, construction tech, whichever way you spin the whole piece, is very en vogue. And when quote unquote big data, AI, machine learning, data science, all those big buzzwords, SaaS, that you could probably draw a line in a year in each of the last 6 or 7 years where they've become the top thing that all of a sudden 30 or 40% extra founders suddenly appear in those areas because that's where the money is all of a sudden. Now, what I'm starting to pick up on a bit is exactly that in your world of where you invest. More broadly in climate tech, I would add, and renewables and lots of mobility. So I would argue, are you seeing a sort of influx of supply because people are thinking, I should focus on this area because we've got a much higher chance of becoming superstar founders and making some amazing tech? Or am I being facetious here?
Well, I mean, if your assumption is that every startup is a vanity project, then that might be a way to look at it. But I do think that you look at the current generation of founders, millennials, Gen Z, and they're deeply concerned. My 9-year-old daughter is deeply concerned about the state of the world and the state of the planet. And of course, you have an environment where you suddenly have this convergence of policymakers and regulation. You have really quite finite targets, that need to be met in order to achieve policy goals. And everyone suddenly understands there's a huge discrepancy between our aspirations and where we actually are. And to bridge that gap, you need to innovate. And it's a in that sense once in a lifetime opportunity to really concentrate your resources on trying to solve this challenge. And that's really what's driving the investment. The private sector has a role to play here. The public sector is playing a very, very significant role. You look at some of the legislation in the US, the Biden anti-inflation pact, for example. You look at what the EU is doing with the EU Green Deal, the amount of resources that are made available in order to accelerate the transition to net zero. That is a very, very benign environment to be creating a company into. And I think that is really what's driving the kind of reallocation, if you like, of resources you're seeing in the moment. That said, I think it's also important to understand there are probably two types of businesses here, right? So we are very much focused on existing technologies applied to specific sectors. So we are not trying to reinvent or do very foundational investments in breakthrough technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence or fusion or what have you. You're really looking for those sector-specific applications. How can you use AI to improve a construction site? How can you use AI in order to improve a material discovery process? So we are in that sense are not sort of moonshot investors. We are really looking for very, very practical applications for very practical problems. Then you have a second set of investments. Thinking about energy generation and fusion as an example, these are really big bets and quite binary bets. No one is quite sure, is it going to work or not? And that there's a particular type of investor going after these sort of big bets. That's not us. I have to add, but we certainly see people are making quite brave decisions, and I think that's a good thing overall. Now, is there?
Sorry, Sebastian, I'll stop you there. Would you say that on that latter point, it's more strategics or corporate VC or private equity coming down the pipe that are trying to do the big projects? Yeah. Because clearly, these are going to need funding of many, many millions for many, many years, I imagine.
No, I think it is actually not too dissimilar picture from what we've seen in previous sort of technology waves, if you like. I think top of the pile are the big US funds. They've always had that capacity to really invest into potential paradigm shifts, whether it's in mobility, whether it's in energy generations, and to take these really big and bold bets. There are a very, very small number of funds that are doing this in Europe. You have over the past few years seen quite significant bets by the likes of Atomico, for example. So you have a handful of investors who, if you like, have the risk appetite and mentality to follow that path. But I think within European venture capital, it's still broadly true, I would say, that people are a little bit more focused on solving slightly more practical problems. Corporate VC is an interesting point in the moment. I think the sort of crossover investors, whether it's corporate VC or others, who have certainly played their part in 21 and before. There's a little bit of retrenchment there, so we'll see how that plays out.
So would a good example of the US type of fund that you're talking about, making these sort of binary moonshot type bets, be like Lower Carbon Capital by Chris Sacca? I don't know if you've
yeah.
That
That's certainly what I mean. Look, we have made a few. We've made a couple of LP investments in the US. There's a fund which I think really is a fantastic example of this. Called Ed1 Ventures. The founder of Ed1 Ventures is one of the people who set up Google X, and he's thinking big. And his vision of the world and the way he approaches technology bets, that's quite an incredible mindset. And we always, when we talk to him, feel quite inspired. And I think that's really still something that makes the US an exceptional ecosystem. That's something that we need a little bit more of, I think, in Europe. Really the sort of the bold visionaries who are also commanding the resources and have the track records to ensure that at least some of those bets pay off.
Who are you referring to there, Sebastian? Which person?
Tom Chi.
Okay, and he's the founder of
Ed1 Ventures.
And one.
They're based where?
Ed1. Take a look at their website and their portfolio. I mean, I personally think they're an incredible fund. I have co-invested with one of the partners in Ascent Elements, which is a big battery recycling company now that's doing incredibly well. And they are really trying to push the frontier in many ways, which is really admirable. So I think through interactions with funds like this, we clearly also strive to ensure that our own mind is continuously expanding, and we're not too blinkered.
So I have listeners, I believe, at 100 Treasury Street, which is our beloved government and the many different departments. What sort of rocket do we need to fire into that building? Excuse the pun.
Definitely a metaphor for anybody listening.
Yeah, probably a poor one, actually. Maybe Christmas cracker is a better one, as we're coming up to Christmas. What do we pull? Which Christmas cracker? It will, from your experience of the Nordics and Netherlands, what do we need to copy?
Yeah, there are two things that I think are really important. The first one is you have to find a way to incentivize landlords to really care about energy consumption. In the moment, you have basically a situation where the energy bill is paid by the tenant. It's not paid by the landlord. So the landlord has very little incentive to invest into the property in order to push down the tenant's bills, right? So if you find a way to shift the burden, or at least part of the burden, so it sort of stings the landlord a little bit more if the house isn't insulated, and if whatever fuel is being used gets terribly expensive, as is currently the case. You need to ensure that there's a real incentive to create a better building and a more efficient building, and that is currently not the case in the rental space. So that's one aspect. I think the other aspect is, if you are a homeowner, I think at this point, given the cost of energy, there is probably already quite a strong incentive, if you have the means and resources, to think about how you can potentially insulate your house better, replace your glazing and so on. There's a lot of historic building stock in the UK. I think some of the conservation laws need to be potentially reviewed in terms of what you can do without obviously ruining the sort of cultural heritage. But I think there's a little bit more progressive thinking required there. But most importantly, you really need a way to equip or give people access to the resources that are needed to make the investment into improving, the existing building stock. And I think there, given the current interest rate environment, the way house prices are headed, it's not a easy equation anymore, as it might have been a few years back, to put a little bit of money in your house because you know you're going to always be able to sell it for a higher price later. So making the sort of investment case used to be quite easy, but it's become much more hard now. And I think that is something that I would be concerned about if I were the Treasury. How can I get investment into the sector and incentivize homeowners to really make the investment despite these really challenging macroeconomic conditions?
Okay, great advice. Thanks for that. I hope they're listening. So spinning around a bit, back to the sort of actual mechanics of the fund. It's the first fund.
It's the first fund, yeah.
Fully deployed. How many companies invested in?
Yeah.
Potentially next year, maybe investing in another 5, 10.
Yeah.
Just a bit of shape for avid
Absolutely.
founders who are impressed by Sebastian and want to
Yeah.
kind of hunt you down and ask you to write them a check.
Yeah, very good. They're very welcome to. So we are 1/3 deployed from the initial pool of capital. So we have set about 40% aside of the fund for follow-on investments, but out of that, sort of 60% we have deployed about 1/3. And we've done 10 investments over the last year or so. And we're just going to announce actually our next one next week. So we will probably continue to invest at that pace, about 10 deals per year. And our sort of deployment period will end at the end of 24. And we are thinking about going out and raising the next fund at some point Q4 next year. Obviously, we'll have to look a little bit at how the general fundraising environment is shaping up. But that is sort of our roadmap in the moment. We roughly, you can sort of, say roughly speaking, we invest about 25 million per year. Out of that sort of, pot of initial checks, and then of course the follow-on investment comes out of the remaining 40%. So between 25 and 30 million per year.
Okay. So, the area you're in, two more sort of specific areas I want to drill into. Are the valuations starting to become a bit crazy, or are they sensible?
The hype premium, right?
Yeah. And then the other aspect is, really impressed by what you've told us today, Sebastian. Naturally, the VC industry is still growing. It's still growing fast. I still get, an email probably every week from a new fund. Could we meet, or we do this, or a press release on someone, which is great, and I really like that. But I don't think I've seen many as specifically focused as you good selves, which is a good thing, because you probably can clean up on the better businesses. But I suppose the question here, or the second question, is: do you expect more competition for the investments that you're going to be making going forward?
Mm-hmm. So there are sort of two types of deals we see. There is the really difficult tech and the complex tech. And to give you an example, there's a company in the UK which is working on a low carbon cement, which involves quite complex technology. It's hardware. It's a conservative industry, and bringing that type of product into the market is not without its challenges. And it's the kind of business that we really like, with an incredible founder, but it's not to everyone's taste. And if you're a generalist fund, you might not look at this as the highest priority when you're thinking about how you deploy your capital. So there's definitely merit in being a specialist and looking at companies where you probably don't have quite the same level of competition that you may have for a highly scalable, super popular a fintech company or whatever it might be.
I suppose if we were to sort of look at a few things that would be a mixed shift in 2023. I suppose more positive news flow from tech would help. Naturally, I suppose on a bigger picture, some kind of resolution of Ukraine and normalization of energy. And then I suppose commentary from my old friends at Bloomberg more about it's a softer landing than people had expected. And then I suppose if you draw the line, it always takes 12 to 18 months to work through into people's pockets. Obviously, you're in the Munich, so traveling, I imagine airport, guessing.
I am at the airport, although I wish I would be at the train station. But that's a different debate altogether.
Okay.
We need more high-speed rail.
You're being hit by the lovely weather that we seem to have here in the UK, which is pretty Arctic at the moment. But I was just going to ask, fun outside of Kompas? Is it kids, family, watching football? Because obviously we're about to see the mighty World Cup
big game coming on. Big game coming on.
Who's
living out historic battles.
I won't mention anything about your country, but any.
I remember I've got 2 passports now, so I can also cheer for England. So which of course we'll do tonight. So no, I live 10 minutes from the sea in the Netherlands. I do spend the weekends with my family, do a little bit of cycling, kite surfing, those types of things. And that gives me really a good balance because I do travel quite a lot. I need to cover the Nordics, France, UK, and Benelux, and that means I do spend quite a lot of time in the various capitals, of those regions. But I do like food. I really love food. That's sort of one of the big passions of my life. And I recently bought a beautiful record player, and I now build up my record collection. That is also one of the small joys of my life.
Anthony, anything from you?
Yeah, I did actually have 2 questions that we didn't cover in case we have time or that you find them interesting. So I'll just give you both of them, and then we can decide if you want to answer them. The first one was, being so specialist, do you see a lot of synergies between the portfolio companies? Do they interact with each other very much? And then the second one was, given the various geographies, I was wondering if you could just comment on having to do deals in different cultures, Dutch, German, Israeli, that sort of thing as well. So
yeah, absolutely. I obviously grew up or spent the second part of my life in the UK for the most part, and in the US. And until very recently, I'd never really done a transaction in Germany. And since I've been doing that, my admiration for the Anglo-Saxon way of doing things has just grown infinitely, because, of course, what makes the UK in many ways such a brilliant place to do business is the ability to do things digitally, the pragmatism as you engage in business. And that is, I'm afraid, unfortunately, completely absent in Germany, where you still have a system that is just mind-boggling, where you literally, in order to close a transaction, rather than using DocuSign, you have to go to a notary. You have to sit there. You have to read out the documentation, and it's all terribly complicated and involves paper and what have you. And it really feels archaic. And I think it's a sign of a sort of bigger malaise that the willingness, especially in Germany, to really aggressively push the digitalization agenda forward, whether it's in the context of public administration, whether it's in the context of private business transaction. Just so much more needs to happen. And I think UK in many ways is really a benchmark, as are the Nordics and the Netherlands, I should say. I think the other thing that I think is incredibly powerful and has resulted in the UK being such a great tech hub is the way early stage investments, angel investments, are benefiting from the EIS and SEIS rules, which for the life of me, I can't understand why they're not being replicated in Europe, because it means that there's a lot of money that is going very, into the ecosystem at a very early stage, and really creates that sort of top of the funnel. And that is an incredible asset the UK has. If it's now smart about how it continues to be able to get the right talent into the country, I think the UK stands a good chance to continue to sort of be a leader. But this is certainly something that I found quite striking, because I've grown up in the Anglo-Saxon world, doing business. All of my career pretty much took place in the UK or in the US, and coming back, you kind of see that in certain ways, for sure. Places in particular like Germany are a little bit behind the curve.
Thanks for that. And then just one more question from me. Being such a specialized thematic fund, do you see a lot of interplay and synergies between the companies? Do they interact with each other? Is that part of the added value that you guys are bringing? Just some comments on that.
Yeah, so I think we are still in an early stage of our portfolio construction. We intend to bring our portfolios companies together for the first time next year in April in Cambridge, at Cambridge University, and sort of we'll have a couple of days where we bring them and our industry network together to really allow them to talk peer-to-peer, network, and find commonalities, whether it's providing advice to each other, sales and marketing, product and engineering, or general management practices, or whether it's actually fostering collaborations. We do have a few companies that could potentially work a little bit more closely with each other, but this still needs a little bit of time to play out, and we do our bit to ensure that at least the opportunity is there for them to discover how to potentially collaborate. But it's still a very early stage in that regard.
Interesting. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know Chris has already gone, but I appreciate you staying on to answer these other questions.
No, thank you very much, Anthony. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good flight.